In today's Daily Take over at HartmanReport.com, I wanted to reprise an issue that every year, or maybe even once or twice a year, or 3 times a year, I really feel the need to bring up. And that is this issue of corporate personhood, this idea that corporations have rights as human beings under the Bill of Rights, under the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. And, we now have corporations that are claiming the First Amendment right of free speech. There's a David Sirota's newsletter, thelever.com, I think is the website this morning, had a brilliant rant about how AT&T is funding election deniers and traitors, basically. Excuse me. That's the First Amendment. The gun companies are claiming the Second Amendment and have enriched it, by their contributions to the Supreme Court. I don't hear much about the Third Amendment. You don't quarter soldiers. But the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy, you've got corporations. DuPont, for example, sued the Environmental Protection Agency when they flew a plane over a factory to detect benzene emissions and said, you violated our right to privacy. You can't do that without a search warrant. And because, we're a person. And so now, if the government wants to inspect a company's books or inspect a company for pollution or something, they've got to get a search warrant. The Fifth Amendment, protections against taking, and more importantly, the Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination. Corporations have actually declared that they're going to take the Fifth. I mean, just this idea that these rights that are supposed to be specifically for human beings are being applied to corporations. And of course, the First Amendment right of free speech, which is being used to say, I can buy politicians, that 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court have interpreted as the legal right to bribe politicians. This is criminal stuff. And not just that, this is what brought us Donald Trump. Had we not allowed dark money to go nuts, then we wouldn't have Donald Trump. And we had a pretty good handle on this in the mid-1970s. After it came out that, Spiro Agnew resigned his vice presidency in the Nixon administration because he was about to be convicted of bribery when he was governor and when he was vice president, when he was governor of New Jersey and when he was vice president. Agnew resigned, and of course, Jerry Ford got put in there. But then Nixon, when Nixon went down, we discovered that Nixon had taken a $500,000 bribe from the milk lobby and had taken a $1 million bribe from Jimmy Hoffa. And that was to get him off a criminal deal. That was to influence the Department of Justice. So as a result of that, you had the Church Commission hearings, and there were several other congressional hearings. Many of them, theoretically were around Watergate and all that kind of stuff. But the larger frame in many cases was funding of elections. And out of that, in 1974 and 1975, we got some really good government laws. We got federal funding of elections, the little checkoff box on your taxes. Now, I'm not sure if it only happened at that time, but it was certainly highlighted at that time. Where you can put money into the presidential election fund. I'm pretty sure that precedes that, but limits on dark money, campaign contribution, disclosure rules, all kinds of really good government legislation got passed in the mid-70s, and then the Supreme Court went after it. And that was in 1976 with the Buckley decision, and in 1978 with the Bellotti decision, and then in 2010 with the Citizens United decision. And the rubric that they've used for all these things, the gimmick, the frame that they use to justify saying that corporations should be able to own politicians has always been corporate personhood, that corporations are persons. And this is a doctrine that has never actually been adjudicated before the U.S. Supreme Court. I know in 1815, they recognized Dartmouth College as having a foreign corporation at the time, in fact, as having a legal right, a legal standing to sue and be sued, a certain type of personhood. But that's not the same thing as saying that you've got a First Amendment right to free speech. That, in large part, is more of the modern era, but it was set up by this 1886 case, Southern Pacific Railroad versus, what was the county? I'll have to look it up. But anyway, there we go. Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. Thank you very much, me. I wrote a book about, I have so many Supreme Court cases in my head. Anyhow, I wrote a book about this that was published a little more than a decade ago. It's called Unequal Protection. It's been updated twice now. And when we were doing the research for that book, or when I was doing actually a friend of mine, Dave DeBronkart, helped out a little bit too. And when we were doing the research for that book, one of the things that we found was, first of all, we discovered that, you know, it wasn't the Supreme Court decision in the Santa Clara County case that led to the corporate personhood. In fact, the Supreme Court in that 1886 case decided against the railroad. The railroad lost the case. And their whole argument was, we're a corporation, we're a person, we should not have to pay the same, you know, we should pay the same tax rate as everybody else. We should have protection under the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. They ruled against them. But in the head note, the court reporter, a guy by the name of John Chandler Bancroft Davis, whose father had been the governor of Massachusetts, he was kind of, you know, political royalty in the United States. And he was the former president of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. John Chandler Bancroft Davis wrote a head note, apparently at the urging of Justice Stephen Field. Another thing we found in the archives when we researched this was the correspondence between some of the big railroads and Justice Field, basically saying that if he would help them out with corporate personhood, they would help him out with free transportation, and they would support his candidacy for president in the 1896 or 1898 election, whatever year the election was held that year. And, you know, so basically he was being bribed. And Bancroft Davis, John Chandler Bancroft Davis, wrote in this head note that Justice Waite, Morrison Remick Waite, the Chief Justice of the United States, in this case, had said, you know, nobody's debating here whether corporations are persons. We all agree they are. End of discussion. And it was completely out of context. What Waite was saying was, you know, yes, corporations can sue and be sued. They have, you know, they have a type of personhood. It's a personhood that non-humans have, but they're not human beings. And so, you know, but this has been interpreted, or, you know, basically what happened was everybody pointed at it and said, oh, look at that, the Supreme Court said corporations are persons. And then the Supreme Court itself quoted that head note, and has on a number of occasions, including in Citizens United, they quote that head note, and said, see, here's the proof. You know, Morrison Waite said this back in 1886, when he didn't say that, or he did say that, but not in that context. He didn't mean that. And so we even found this letter from Waite, Chief Justice Waite, to Court Clerk Davis, saying, you know, I think you captured the essence of what we talked about, but we did not respond to the constitutional issue. In other words, we never ruled on corporate personhood, on whether the 14th Amendment protects corporations as well as human beings. We never ruled on that. And I reproduced the actual letter in Waite's handwriting on Supreme Court letterhead to Davis in the article today that you can find over at hartmanreport.com. So, you know, as they say, documentary proof. But I think it's important that we remember that if it wasn't for that decision and the subsequent decisions, all of them made by corrupted members, you know, the more recent ones, Buckley, Bellotti, and Citizens United, by members of the court who were either openly on the take, like Clarence Thomas, or total right-wing ideologues, you know, like Lewis Powell, who actually wrote the Bellotti decision in 1978, that were it not for these decisions, we would not have Donald Trump, and you would not have today's Republican Party. You would not have a party that is entirely in the bag with big corporations, that denies climate change on behalf of the fossil fuel industry, that is just fine with having regular school shootings in America on behalf of the weapons industry, that refuses to do anything about, you know, how destructive Medicare Advantage is because they're owned by the insurance industry, who refuses to do anything about drug prices because they're owned by big pharma, who won't take on the airlines because they're owned by the big airlines. I mean, you know, it just goes on and on and on. The GOP, you know, as Harry Truman famously said, is, you know, the Democratic Party is the People's Party, and the Republican Party is the party of the rich and powerful, and always has been and always will be. And here we are. And in large part, it's been made possible by these decisions of the Supreme Court, these corrupt decisions of the Supreme Court. And, you know, we can restore our human rights by, we can amend the Constitution, we could have Congress overturn the Supreme Court decision. We could pack the Supreme Court, add to the Supreme Court, and maybe get them to reverse some of these terrible decisions. But we have to do something, because this corporate personhood idea, and by the way, I just signed a fundraiser for one of the Move to Amend, one of the really great organizations that's out there trying to do. You may not have received it in your email box yet. That's trying to do work on this area, but there's people working on this stuff, and it's important work, because this is what we need to do to bring America back from the brink, among many other things, obviously. But I don't want this to fall off the radar screen.